Isn't it crazy that it's been 4 years since Enlisted first launched? It's kind of amazingly how quiet it has survived. I mean, for most World War II shooters, they either die, they go to niche, or they burn out just trying to reinvent themselves. But Enlisted has somehow kept itself going despite its, well, kind of controversial background as well. It's never had a huge mainstream moment, don't get me wrong, no massive Steam hype waves or viral Reddit posts, or, of course, the Battlefield clips that seem to get everywhere. But over time, update after update, it's slowly become one of the most interesting large-scale shooters still being worked on to this day. So, let's actually have a look at Enlisted 4 years later, where it started, how it's evolved, and what the new, huge updates say about the game's future. When it launched back in 2021, it actually stood out immediately from everything else because of this squad-controlled game mode. You weren't just one soldier, you had some AI lads that would follow you about, all having their own different weapons, personalities, and names. Every match, they let you switch between your soldiers on the fly. Riflemen, machine gunners, engineers, medics, all of them under your command. And when you died, well, you didn't need to go back to a respawn point, you could actually just move on to another member of your squad and keep fighting. It was kind of this hybrid FPS and strategy game all in one, half Battlefield, half Company of Heroes. I don't know too many games have really done this, especially in the shooter space, and really, well, you can kind of understand why. Did it work? Some ways. In some ways it was a little bit sloppy. Your AA would be caught out in the open, they'd kind of signify where you are. You wouldn't be able to take cover or hide behind things because your AI soldiers would just stand up in a trench and get their head taken off. But it was a cool concept. The idea was to try and make you feel like both a grunt but also a commander at the same time, having to shoot in the front lines in the mud and the dirt, but also leading AI troops into combat, building defenses, calling in artillery, so on and so forth. And when it worked, it did feel great. The battles were cinematic, pretty chaotic, but immersive nonetheless. Planes would die overhead, tanks would thunder through ruins, and AI would be dying beside you. Messy, but unique. A bit like, well, my favourite Friday nights. That chaos, though, was a bit of a part of the charm. There were times where you just charge into a village, your AI soldiers blindly following, only for artillery to land and wipe everybody out in a single explosion. It's frustrating, but that was part of the story, part of what Enlisted was trying to be, delivering something that no other shooter quite managed. But whilst this concept was pretty strong, the systems around it caused a bit of frustration. Early years of Enlisted were dominated by two issues: free-to-play monetization and fragmented campaign systems. At launch, every front, whether it was Normandy, Moscow, Berlin, Tunisia, had their own separate progression tree. If you unlocked a weapon or vehicle in one campaign, you'd have to grind it all over again in another. And this kind of made sense on paper, but each campaign was meant to be a self-contained World War II experience, and that's what they were going for. Yet when it came to, well, actually trying to make a fun game, it split the player base, slowed down matchmaking, and punished long-term play. Then there were, of course, premium squads. This is a gauging game, after all, the people behind War Thunder. Fully leveled soldiers with upgraded weapons and perks purchasable with real money. They were meant to be shortcuts, but actually they just became a symbol of imbalance. Premium squads don't just shoot faster, they live longer. For a game that relied on tension and squad survival, being instantly wiped by somebody's pay-to-win super soldiers felt a little bit like a civilian watching as Captain America charged towards you. But to the devs' credit, they did somewhat listen, and over time monetization got toned down, and then Enlisted in 2024 unleashed one of its biggest systematic changes: unified progression. Instead of all these campaigns being separate, all of your weapons and vehicles and soldiers now tied it into a single connected system. It finally felt like one big World War II sandbox, not 4 disconnected fragments. That change actually made the game feel modern again. It cut down on the grind, made switching campaigns kind of worthwhile, and showed that the developers are, well, at least listening. Even if it isn't perfect, they weren't just endlessly pumping out content. They were trying to refine that core structure that people actually wanted to play. Because this game managed to glide itself into a new system of player base. You see, whilst the Battlefields and Call of Duties all have been building up their huge player bases over decades, you have games like Squad 44 or Hell Let Loose that have more of the hardcore fans. But Enlisted went for something else. Because of its free-to-play nature, it meant that it was open to everybody, and that meant that it was a much more casual experience. Does that hurt the game? I don't think so, not at least in the long term. That seems to be one of the reasons that it's actually kept going for so long. And that brings us to Enlisted in 2025, exactly where the future of this game is going and exactly what's happening. The new Scorching Rays update, which honestly might be one of the biggest leap forward since launch, is not just a new weapons pack or event, it's a full-scale overhaul, combining map reworks, graphics upgrades, new hardware, quality of life improvements, so many old pain points in the original game, but we need to properly break this down to understand exactly what they've decided to change. The Battle of Tunisia, one of my favourite campaigns, has been part of Enlisted for over 4 years now, and whilst it's always been the best in terms of its visual stunningness, its bright sand, ancient villages and desert fortifications, it's had a few major design flaws. Players obviously getting complained about being sniped across open dunes. This is something that we've seen in many open, sandy maps like this. Caves also pretty confusing, visibility poor, combat felt a bit more unpredictable than the other maps as well, and it didn't really feel as much World War II as you'd get from the, let's say, Western Front. But in Scorching Rays, they've finally fixed this. The biggest change is a complete redesign of the Caliph Cave village area. One of the old cave systems has been replaced entirely with new landmarks, whilst others have been rebuilt with staircases, cover points and clear navigations. The entire map has been restructured into 4 distinct zones: forest, village, ruins and caves, and that might sound small, but it actually completely transforms the way that the battles play out. This actually feels like a really fast-flowing game now, and I adore it. Terrain adjustments also have smoothed out vehicle paths, whilst tank sightlines from the grey zones, those frustrating out-of-bounds areas where tanks could farm infantry, they've been tightened up a little bit better. Don't get me wrong, it still happens, but it's, not as frustrating because it's not as common. And then, of course, the graphics or the visual design. They've now introduced full ray tracing, which, whilst isn't really available to everybody, of course, you need the hardware for it. Visual fidelity, it is a jump forward. Lighting, reflections, they now react way more naturally to the environment. Sunbeam filtering through trees, tanks casting realistic reflections in puddles, muzzle flashes bouncing light off nearby walls. It's subtle, but together it adds a whole new layer of atmosphere. On top of that, Scorching Rays really revamps every major visual effect within the game, with explosion shockwaves, impact marks from bullets, grass and foliage. They look so much denser and better animated. I mean, I think they've done a fantastic job of overhauling everything that this game does visually. And then, of course, there was always, some new hardware for you to play with. It wouldn't really be an Enlisted update without it. You've got the M1921 Thompson, better known as the Chicago typewriter. You've got the Churchill Mark 7 heavy tank, British Army tank. It's absolutely beastly with its 75mm gun. The Japanese have got a new shotgun. They've got the Chi Nu 2 tank as well, and the KI-83 as well, which is a new fighter. Of course, this is a game that really is mostly focused on armor and infantry, but for the few people that are mental and love playing in planes, there's some new extra stuff for you. In terms of the gameplay systems, the update also delivers a small series, but meaningful series of improvements. The desertion penalty system's been reworked. Before, if your internet just dropped out or you're disconnected mid-match, you'd often get slapped with a penalty. Now the system only applies punishment if you leave more than once every 5 matches, so occasional disconnects aren't too big emergencies. Matchmaking also been improved. The game now tries to group squads against other squads whenever enough players are in queue, even creating more battles. So 4 years later, there's been actually a lot of good stuff. I think actually the game's probably in the best shape it's ever been. Being on console, being on its own launcher, and being on Steam now. The visuals are perfect, I'd say, for this sort of game. It is free to play, it's not going to have the budget behind it as other titles, but my oh my, does it still look pretty goddamn good. The progression system finally makes a bit more sense, and the developers seem to have found a bit of a rhythm for releasing these updates. And most importantly, the game still feels unique despite being in a world of kind of saturated World War II shooters. The squad switching mechanic gives it that identity. Hell Let Loose leans into teamwork and realism. Battlefield 5 is pretty much dead, but anyone that still plays it for its cinematic action. And Enlisted sort of sits in that middle. Structured chaos, but, still something quite fun. Of course, the flaws are still there. The AI is still god-awful. They'll sprint into open fire or stand in doorways, but I feel like that's kind of starting to become part of the charm of that. And there's kind of that identity crisis as well. Is it going to be more of the hardcore tactical shooter or an arcadey game? Sometimes it does feel a little bit torn between both. You can have these ultra realistic moments crawling through smoke and debris, followed by absurd AI melee charges, or just, barrel shooting ducks, as you can see AI just lining up against doorways and windows that just seem to have their heads with targets on them. Those are some things that still need to be fixed, Whether they will ever be completely patched, I very much doubt it. I think that's just sort of the game at this point. It's not perfect, and it has a lot of rough edges, and it probably always will, but it remains one of the most in-depth free-to-play World War II shooters. And I think that's something to remember. Whilst this game isn't a Battlefield, it isn't a Hell Let Loose, it is free. And it opens up playability to players that perhaps maybe couldn't get into those other titles. It's also pretty easy to run on most systems. Of course, it's added in ray tracing, but you don't need to play it with ray tracing. And games like, Battlefield 5 and even Hell Let Loose are a bit more intensive on systems. And it means that with that and the price tags, it means it's not as accessible to the majority of players. So I think Enlisted does have a special place, and a place that it needs to be within this community. But let me know what you think. Please leave a comment down below. But until then, I will see you in the next one.